everybody. Some of you, actually many of you are familiar faces, so I'm glad that you could make it today. I am only speaking on behalf of several groups that have come together to organize, I think, what is a very important occasion. Some of those groups, and so you'll have to forgive me if I'm forgetting any, but those, we have to, I think, first and foremost have to thank the Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology, headed by Professor Peter Casarella and his more than able, his in fact outstanding assistant, Karen Kraft. I think there are other groups around DePaul that are also helping to sponsor this event as part of World Catholicism Week. And I'm not sure all of those groups, and so I don't want to leave anybody out, so I'll just leave it with the premier group. In addition, we also have some other very esteemed members. We have Bishop Joseph Perry, who is with us today. We have Andrew Like, and we have Vanessa White, who are also with us. And so, in addition to our two presenters today, who I will also introduce a little bit later, I'm going to keep my remarks brief, but I do want to say that this is a very important occasion. I think in many ways it's part of a conversation that's been taking place for a very long time in American history, a conversation that deals with the intersection of religion, race, and personhood. And I think Father Augustus Tolton, the first African-American identified priest in the United States, plays a very prominent role in this conversation. And I have to admit that before Professor Casarella even brought him to my attention, I knew next to nothing about his prominence in American religious life, even though not much of my course, but a part of my course on the African-American intellectual experience deals specifically with both African Catholicism and then African-American Catholicism. So this is a very important occasion. We are going to have remarks and the presentation given to our award winners by Bishop Perry. And so I want to introduce him. I have a few things to say about him. He was born here in Chicago, April 18th, 1884, in 1948. He's the product of Chicago Catholic schools. He did attend George Washington Carver High School for a year, but then finished his elementary education in Catholic schools. In an interview, apparently he explained that at the age of 9, he in fact wanted to be a priest, and I think that we should all be glad that he in fact followed that desire, that dream, that calling. He was ordained a priest in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee on May 24th, 1974. His Episcopal ordination occurred in Chicago on June 29th, 1998. And this ordination made him both titular bishop of Lead, a former see in South Dakota, and also auxiliary to His Eminence Francis Cardinal George, Archbishop of Chicago. Now, as an auxiliary bishop, Bishop Perry stands as the current Episcopal Vicar for Vicariate 6 of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And to give you some sense of how busy he is, he administers to 75 parishes, 2 missions, an oratory, 55 elementary schools, 7 secondary schools, 96 priests, and 250,000 Catholics. So the fact that he was able to make just a little bit of time for us today, I think says a lot, and I think we owe him just a little bit of applause for that. But I'm not quite done. His resume of theological and legal training includes graduation from St. Joseph College in Rensselaer, Indiana, where he received a BA in philosophy, a BA in theology, and a minor in education. So for all of you who are double majoring or minoring, he's the guy to talk to. He might have a bit of advice about getting through. His education continues. He received an MDiv from Frank Francis de Sales Major Seminary in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and a JCL, licentiate in canon law from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Now, the license in canon law differs from a doctorate, but we should essentially think of them as the same thing, a highly advanced degree that in many ways mirrors the doctorate. So we're talking about an expert in canon law, okay? Given his extensive educational record and expertise, he has taught graduate level courses in canon law and education at Sacred Heart School of Theology, Hales Corners, Wisconsin, St. Mary of the Lake Seminary in Mundelein, Illinois, and classes at Marquette University School of Law in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He has also served in church courts as an advocate and judge and as a conciliation and arbitration officer. Now, this is just not even the full extent of his resume, but it's just a little bit since I don't have that much time. But I also want to say that in addition, his vita of pastoral service and professional membership is extremely comprehensive. Some highlights would have to include his 13-year pastorship to All Saints Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, his 12-year position as a Chief Judicial Officer of the Tribunal for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, his current membership on the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Education, his current chairmanship of the U.S. CCB Committee on African American Catholics, and his service as the standing vice president of the Board for the Black Catholic Congress in Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. Forgive me. In light of all of this, Father Perry has and continues to serve as an exemplary leader, educator, adjudicator, pastor, and priest. His career represents a uniquely impressive combination of vision, leadership, and I think very humble advocacy for African American Catholicism, religious toleration, and ultimately social justice. For all of these reasons, it is completely appropriate that Bishop Perry is the diocesan postulator, or the official organizer, the leader, for the cause for sainthood for Augustus Tolton, the person who in many ways has brought all of us here today. And so with that introduction, I would like to very much introduce Bishop Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. You make it sound so wonderful. You can speak at my funeral. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that so many of you came together to hear presentations, two insightful reflections on a great man and a great priest who was a citizen of the city for a short time before he was taken away from us with an untimely death at the age of 43. I thank the Religious Studies Department here at DePaul, and Casarella and Karen Kraft and CISE for putting this program together and helping us get the word out about Father Augustus Tolton, whom the Church would like to give its highest honor that it can give a human being, and that is the title of sainthood. The touching story of Father Augustus Tolton reminds us of the glaring social deficits of a former time in history in this country. Much has improved since that time, but much still remains to be done to build on the society that we call free here in America. A religious figure like Father Tolton rises with unique inspiration amidst the barriers and the separations once ordered between black and white in our society. His was a quiet and noble approach, as you will see and hear. He himself was an apostle to both black and white. Forces attempted to derail his priestly service, in a creeping milieu of diversity that cried out for social and legal recognition that the country, for whatever reasons, could not give. Here in Chicago, whereas overt opposition was much lessened, Father Tolton still lived the racial neighborhood isolation that was indigenous to our city, as many cities, that made his efforts to build up the church here doubly hard. The good Lord allowed his witness a short stay here. He is a pioneer, one who easily elicits our sympathy, but one who also reminds us of the courage that we have within our hearts to continue to work for racial and ethnic solidarity while eradicating all forms of hesitancy or intolerance. So with that, we would like to introduce to you Father Tolton and those who have graciously reflected about him and written about him. Thank you very much.
First African-American priest to serve not only in the Archdiocese of Chicago, but anywhere in the nation.
He was exactly what he did better up here. He was supposed to be somewhere north, but it was hard. And yet, in the midst of the hardship, he was very good. That was it's time to prepare for the center. Despite the suffering,
Oh, excuse me, folks. We're going to stop it for 1 second just to make sure we can adjust the volume.
We tested it beforehand and it was fine.
The lights on? Turn it on. Let's see.
Cause for Father Tolton's sainthood, a role that Bishop Perry embraces. The ceremony in St. James Chapel at the Quigley Center played to a full house, and well it should. In official terms, it was the proclamation and first session of the canonical trial examining possible sainthood for Father Augustus Tolton. For those in attendance, it was a big deal.
When I first heard it, I said, Uncle Gus, you have not been forgotten for all the hard struggle, the work, trying to create a place for worship for Black Catholics, an Asian, a white person, to kneel together and worship our Creator. That's what it's all about.
In March of 2010, as part of the Year for Priests, Cardinal Francis George decided to pursue the cause of sainthood for Father Tolton, the first African-American priest to serve not only in the Archdiocese of Chicago, but anywhere in the nation.
he was accepted and he wasn't. He did better up here than he did in Quincy and Southern Illinois, but it was hard. And yet, in the midst of the hardship, he was very joyful. And that's what convinced me maybe it's time to declare Tolton a saint to the Catholic Church as a holy priest who, despite the suffering,
was never angry and was always persistent in his helping people to understand who Christ is, and was joyful.
Cardinal George appointed Bishop Joseph Perry as the diocesan postulator for the cause for Father Tolton's sainthood, a role that Bishop Perry embraces.
During the period of slavery and emancipation and Reconstruction, even through the period of segregation and discrimination thereafter, moving up to the civil rights laws and that, there is no one in this country who has emerged as a saint. In all of that history, that huge stretch there, Tolton surfaces as a minister in our Catholic tradition, someone who suffered in light of that, but still remained steadfast. He was faithful. He didn't dish back anything that was dished out to him. He tried to bring a semblance of Christian faith and Catholicity to a group of people who were not ministered to very well.
The story of Father Tolton begins amid a backdrop of prejudice and oppression. Augustus Tolton was born of slave parents, Martha and Peter Tolton, in Brush Creek, Missouri in 1854. Augustus was baptized at St. Peter Church in Brush Creek, one of the stops on a pilgrimage led by Cardinal George in April 2011. If sainthood is in Tolton's future, his birthplace is ready to celebrate.
One county over in Boone County, where Columbia, Missouri is, when we're building a brand new Catholic high school, and the people, I asked them to give me recommendations for what we would name this new high school. And the first name on the list from these people was Father Tolton. So that shows you, I think we have his life is still inspiring people across the century.
One of the most heroic figures in the life of Augustus Tolton is his mother, Martha. 1 year after the Civil War erupted, with her husband already fighting for the Union, Martha headed toward Illinois with her 3 children. The youngest was a babe in arms, and it was a long trek, several miles from the farm in Missouri to the Mississippi River, with bounty hunters all around. But nonetheless, they got into a boat that wasn't very seaworthy, 1 oar, babe in arms, and 2 kids. And she heroically crossed the Mississippi River. Martha and her children settled in Quincy, Illinois, another of the stops on the recent pilgrimage. Standing at Tolton's gravesite, the director of the Augustus Tolton Pastoral Ministry Program at Catholic Theological Union, Dr. Vanessa White, discusses the significance of that community in the life of Augustus Tolton.
Quincy is very important because this was the place that received both his mother, his brother and sisters, and himself when they escaped slavery from Missouri. They crossed the Mississippi and arrived in Quincy. Quincy was one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. And here in Quincy, he grew, was educated, attended Quincy College, and then where he received his call to continue his studies for the priesthood.
Here he was, someone born a slave, then liberated at the time of the Civil War with his mother, moved to southern Illinois, and the Franciscan order helped him to go to Rome and go through the Urbanianum seminary there. He went there with the idea that just as he wasn't acceptable as a seminarian in our country, he would be acceptable as a priest. And so he was going to go to Africa as a missionary, and it was the Roman authorities who said, look, you come from a so-called enlightened country, let them find out what an African-American priest will be. You go home.
As a priest in Quincy, he was known to be very pastoral. He was known to preach about hope. He preached about forgiveness. He preached about the church being open to all. One of the things that is surprising is that at this time, most churches, Catholic churches, were segregated. And so he, in fact, had a church where black and white both worshiped together.
As a matter of fact, Father Tolton preached so well that some white priests were upset that he was stealing their parishioners. Then, in 1889, Archbishop Patrick Feehan invited Father Tolton to come to Chicago to minister to the city's growing black population.
He worked tirelessly for the community. We know that he was very passionate. The emerging community was in the basement of St. Mary's Catholic Church, and it was the St. Augustine Society. And when he came to Chicago, the hope was that they would build a church, and they built St. Monica's. He was only in Chicago for a short time, and in fact, at the age of 43, when he was returning from a priestly retreat, he got off the train. It was one of the hottest days of the year, and he collapsed from heat stroke. He was sent to Mercy Hospital, where he later died.
And in his death, Father Augustus Tolton leaves behind a legacy of serving his brothers and sisters despite hardships, a legacy of good overcoming evil in the name of Christ Jesus, a legacy of a son of slaves who may one day be Chicago's gift to Catholicism worldwide. St. Augustus Tolton.
As far as the African American community is concerned, he's one of us. And he's a link with our ancestors who obviously bore the brunt of slavery and struggled in order to obtain freedom in our democracy. As far as the Catholic Church is concerned, he's a priest's priest. He's an ideal priest of everything we know a priest should be. He leaves behind a precious legacy of loving and inspiration for priests and people at large.
He was a man of perseverance in the midst of suffering. He was a man of hope during the time when there was hopelessness. He was also a man who was a reconciling figure, bringing peoples of different cultures together. Today, as we are living in these times, we need someone such as Father Tolton to look toward, to model in his life.
For some people, the saints can be at a distance. They lived in a distant time. They lived in a distant land. But for Father Tolton, he's one of our own. He walked our streets, he pastored a parish in our Archdiocese, he rode the train. I think that the cause for the canonization of Father Augustus is a wonderful opportunity for us, the people in the Archdiocese of Chicago. He's one of our own.
He's going to be hopefully a Catholic saint, not just a black Catholic saint, but one that is for the whole church. And so there's an opportunity as we promote this cause to connect our communities, the black Catholic community, which too often is marginalized, that we become, have a different focus within the Archdiocese as sharing the gifts of this legacy of Father Augustus Tolton. This is a cause that is being advanced not just out of the Archdiocese of Chicago, but also the Springfield Diocese, where Quincy is, and the Jefferson City Diocese in Missouri, where his family was a slave, at Brush Creek Church. So he's a unifying figure in terms of this cause for canonization.
Very good. Director Blake, Professor White, Bishop Perry, thank you very much. Not only was that instructive, but I think it also raises a lot of themes and issues that the two people that I'm about to introduce are going to elaborate on for us. And so I want to introduce the two people that have won the Father Augustus Tolton essay contest. I'll introduce them in the order that they are going to give their essays. And I want to remark that for all of the students in the room, many of you my students, thank you for showing up today. The people who have won this contest come from you, in fact. Okay, these are your peers. I have to do a little bit of a plug. This will probably happen next year, so be on the lookout. So with that, let me introduce LaNita Burton. Again, she is one of you, She is a co-winner of this award. And some of her past accomplishments, quite impressive, include Vice President of Service for Phi Theta Kappa, 2-year Honor Society at Prairie State College, Vice President of the Black Student Union and President of the Black Student Union from years 2008-2009 and then 2009-2010. She graduated with an AA cum laude from Prairie State College in 2010. She comes to DePaul from there. She's currently a senior, getting ready to graduate. Congratulations. And she's graduating with a major in the College of Commerce here at DePaul University. She's been on the Dean's List since coming to DePaul with nothing less than a 3.67 grade point average. Quite impressive. She has been invited to be a member of the ETA chapter of Delta Mu Delta Honor Society, International Honor Society in Business. She's currently employed at Misericordia, where she assists individuals who have various disabilities. And after Northwestern, she plans to pursue a joint MBA/JD. And so with that introduction, I would like to introduce to the podium Miss LaNita Love Burton.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is LaNita Burton. I will be reading an essay on Father Augustus Tolton. The name of my essay is "The Goodness of the Lord Endures Forever." I can. Lord, how dare I deny you anything? You who have given me everything. I can drink the cup with you. I want to be a priest. I want to be a priest in America. With these anguished words, Augustus Tolton cries to God after he learned that he must go back to a racist America once he was ordained. Augustus Tolton did not understand how he could be a priest in a place that would not ordain him. He had many supporters. Martha Jane Tolton, his mother, Father Herman J. Schaefermeyer, and Father Michael Richard offered support and inspiration that would give Augustine the determination to overcome his greatest struggle with faith. There are several messages and insights that I uncovered upon reflection on Augustine's determination and devotion. I will mention just 3. The goodness of the Lord endures forever. The church always stands for right and justice, and God's will prevails above all human beings. Augustine Tolton overcame many obstacles on his path to becoming the first recognized African American priest in America. Returning to a racist America after his ordination was his most trying obstacle. I will begin with a brief biography. Augustine Tolton was born on April 1st, 1854, in Brush Creek, Missouri. His mother, Martha Jane Chisley, and his father, Peter Tolton, were married as Catholics. Augustine Tolton and his 2 siblings were baptized Catholics. Peter Tolton wanted a better life for his children. Therefore, he left his family to fight in the Civil War. Unfortunately, Peter Tolton did not survive the war. Augustine's mother agonized over the thought that her family may be separated. Because slaves were running away, slave owners became more abusive and the workload grew more intolerable. Because of Martha Jane Tolton's confidence that God is just and in her faith in his goodness, she decided to escape in 1961. Quincy, Illinois was a refuge for blacks. The journey to Quincy, Illinois was dangerous and long. Mrs. Tolton traveled across the Mississippi River. She paddled with one hand and held her child in the other hand. They dodged bullets and eluded arrest by Confederate officials. There were days when they did not eat. When the Tolton family reached Quincy, Martha Jane said to her children, "Now you are free. never, never forget the goodness of the Lord. Mrs. Tolton repeated this phrase to Augustine throughout his life, during times when his faith was challenged and in those moments in which the Lord's goodness was revealed. Mrs. Tolton was illiterate, but she knew the 10 Commandments, some prayers, and she added, we must never forget to thank the Lord for his goodness, and we must ask him to take care of us always. Mrs. Tolton began attending St. Boniface Church soon after they arrived in Quincy. They were able to attend Mass, but the blacks were confined to a small corner in the church. St. Boniface is where they met Father Herman J. Schaefermeyer, a German priest. Father Schaefermeyer welcomed blacks into the congregation. Father Schaefermeyer segregated the church with great apprehension to accommodate the non-black attendees. The Mass was in German, but Father Schaefermeyer would say some of the Mass in English. St. Boniface is where Augustine began learning German. In 1863, Augustine's brother died. This was very difficult for the family, but they had to persevere. Father Schaefermeyer became the first priest to allow a black child to attend an all-white school. The parents of the students were tolerant of blacks attending Mass. However, they were intolerant of the educating of blacks. His time as a student was short-lived because of threats and ridicule from the parents and the children. This torment was the beginning of his long road to becoming the first recognized African-American priest in the United States. Augustine's educational options were limited. He was desperately in need of a tutor to further his study to becoming a priest. The task seemed almost impossible until a priest by the name of Father Patrick Dolan was assigned to a parish in Missouri. The Tolton family relocated to Missouri. Father Dolan was Augustine's tutor, and Augustine worked in the parish. Mrs. Tolton was a housekeeper and prepared meals. The arrangement was beneficial initially. During their 11th month stay, Father Dolan was late for Mass or missed Mass altogether. Father Dolan missed tutoring sessions with Augustine. He fell asleep during tutoring sessions. He often appeared bored or irritated. One evening, Augustine and Mrs. Tolton found Father Dolan intoxicated in his house. Mrs. Tolton feared that finding Father Dolan in that condition would compromise Augustine's views about the Catholic religion and priesthood. The idea of going to Missouri rang of injustice and enslavement. Therefore, she also feared being kidnapped. They sent Peter McGurr a letter explaining Father Dolan's condition. They received a letter from Peter McGurr explaining Father Dolan's They received a letter from Peter McGurr stating that they were to return to Quincy. Mrs. Tolton looked at Augustine and said, "The goodness of the Lord." Augustine Tolton was initially rejected from Collegium Urbanum de Propaganda Fide. He was losing faith and his endurance was depleting. Mrs. Tolton, aware of his lack of faith, told Augustine, "The Lord, the goodness of the Lord, it endures forever." His faith was being tested severely during that time. Augustine had dreamed of becoming a priest for almost 20 years, and he was beginning to believe that it would only be a dream. Father Richard was grief-stricken by the disillusionment and frustration Augustine displayed. Father Richard decided that he had to act. He wrote to the superior of the whole Franciscan order, Bernardino del Vago da Porto Romatino, at their headquarters in Rome. Bernardino del Vago Porto Romatino was acquainted with the prefect of the Collegium Urbanum de Propaganda Fide. Father Richard was a Franciscan as well, and he felt that was a benefit. In 1879, Augustine received a letter of acceptance from the Collegium Urbanum de Propaganda Fide in Rome to become a priest. Augustine's dream had finally come true. When Augustine told his mother, she said, "Never forget the goodness of the Lord." Mrs. Tolton taught Augustine that the Lord was good when he was young. She reminded him of the Lord's goodness when things that seemed impossible or irreconcilable became possible or were reconciled. Mrs. Tolton wanted Augustine to understand that the Lord's endurance lasts longer than the endurance of human beings. The lesson his mother taught him coincided directly with the lesson and the knowledge he gained from Father Herman J. Schaefermeyer. Father Herman J. Schaefermeyer used to tell Augustine in his German accent, "If God wants you to be a priest, you will be one." Father Schaefermeyer taught Augustine that God's will is above the will of human beings. Father Schaefermeyer told Augustine as a young boy that he would see him through his journey to priesthood. Augustine found out that Father Schaefermeyer left Quincy to enter the Franciscan order. He felt as though he had been deserted. Once Father Schaefermeyer completed his Franciscan order, he suggested that Quincy establish a second German parish. His initiative was put into place, and he unknowingly laid a path for Augustine. St. Francis College was the product of his initiative. Augustine was admitted to the college and was so advanced he needed a private tutor. During the times when Augustine's faith, moral strength, and courage was being tested, he would moan, "The unmistakable will of God. How can this divine be opposed and hindered by the will of men, churchmen?" It was at those moments when Augustine would hear Father Schaefermeyer's voice, "If God wants you to be a priest, you will be one." Along Augustine's journey to priesthood, Augustine understood that his desire to become a priest was directly related to God's will that he was to become a priest. Augustine also understood that God's will endures and human will eventually ends. Augustine learned great things from his mother and Father Schaefermeyer. However, Father Michael Richard would help Augustine understand that church is Christ. Initially, this insight offered to him by Father Michael Richard was difficult for Augustine to grasp. Augustine realizes this insight through this pivotal dialogue with Father Richard. Father Richard, only after we accept the Negro as a person and him an equal and a brother in Christ can we hope to stamp out race hatred. Our hope lies in the church. Augustine, but the church has not accepted us, Augustine protested impulsively. Father Richard, wait a minute, Augustine. When you say the church, you are saying Christ. For church is Christ. When you say the church has not accepted Negroes, you really mean that some members in the church have failed to do so. The church always stands for right and justice. Members of the church, however, since they are human beings, often fall short of the ideals of Christ in his church. Augustine felt that members of the church should be representative of Christ. Augustine lived a righteous and just life at a very young age, and he was a close follower of God. Augustine did not understand why black people were hated, and he was deeply saddened by the people within the congregation who hated his race. He never retaliated against his persecutors. He did not allow his pain to be a reason to indulge in temptations. He did not allow his persecutors to keep him from God or church. He was willing to endure any pain to maintain his relationship with God. Everything Augustine did was to benefit others. He worked to support his family and to save money for his education to become a priest. Augustine wanted to be a priest to help others. His goal was to change the views of members of the church by giving blacks the opportunity other races had. He believed that the way to uplift black people was by being an example of God's endurance, God's will, and the universal representation of church is Christ. Augustine felt that being a priest would be the only way to accomplish that, as he states in this passage. We should have a church for Negroes. a church we could call our own. If I were a priest, I could bring them forgiveness and strength and grace. I could help people to become better. Once Father Richard was able to help Augustine understand the difference between church and the church's members, Augustine developed a desire to have a church for blacks. He believed that blacks deserved to know God the way he knew God. Augustine's life was one of determination, devotion, and almost insurmountable obstacles. While studying at the Collegium Urbana de Propaganda Fide, Augustine educated himself heavily about Africa and African culture. Augustine was sure that he would be sent to Africa since America was not ready for a black priest. Although Augustine wanted to help black people in America become better, he did not miss the racism, hate, and degradation of black people in America. The day before Augustine was ordained, he learned that he was going back to America to be the first recognized African American priest. Augustine Tolton signed the oath with great apprehension. Upon reflection, Father Augustine knew he could not deny God of anything because God endured. God wanted him to be the first recognized African American priest in America. Father Augustine Tolton was chosen by God to help black people reinstate, as stated by Father Richard. He was ready to drink the cup with God. Father Augustine Tolton was inspirational, determined, and devoted. He was inspired. He saw the determination and devotions others had in his dream. Father Augustine Tolton's story has many messages and offers insight for all religions and all races. Martha Jane Tolton, Father Herman J. Schaefermeyer, and Father Michael Richard are some of the mentors that were compassionate and had faith that his journey would end in success. They also believed that this was not only Augustine's fight, but their fight as well. Father Tolton spent a short period in Quincy at St. Joseph's Church. Although his stay was unpleasant, he was delighted to be among black people. St. Mary began with 30 members and grew to over 100 by 1891. This growth prompted a move to a new church, St. Monica's Church, which later became St. Augustine's Church. Father Tolton often walked the streets of Chicago. He looked at the immense, magnificent churches around St. Monica's, and he had no idea that those churches would become Negro churches of the future. In 1889, Father Tolton was a main speaker at the first Catholic Colored Conference in Washington, D.C. At the conference, Father Tolton gave benediction of the Blessed Sacred to the large number of prominent church and civic leaders. Father Tolton died on July 9, 1897, but the people that had compassion and faith in his vision continue to fight today. In January 2010, Bishop Joseph N. Perry was appointed by Cardinal George as postulator of the diocesan phase of the cause for sanctity of Father Tolton. Father Tolton's determination and devotion continues to be recognized. His journey continues, and his example of faith and compassion for others lives on. The runaway slave to priesthood is a story that will never be told again. In 1939, Cardinal Samuel Stritch made the significant proclamation: every church, school, and institution of this archdiocese is open to Catholic people, Negroes, whites, and all nationalities. Father Augustine Tolton should not only be canonized because of his struggle to his priesthood, he should be canonized because of the purpose of his struggle and the accomplishment of his struggle. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, LaNita. That was That was quite enlightening, illuminating, and enjoyable. Thank you very, very much. And so the show's not over. We have yet another. I want to introduce to you Miss Yewande Gilbert. She is a political science major here at DePaul University. She was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to parents Nigerian, Bennett and Stella Gilbert. At the age of 17, very young age, although I suppose you're not too much older now, but at the age of 17, she was selected to represent her state at a law and social justice conference on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. She has worked as a Spanish translator with global brigades in the community of El Cantón, Honduras. She has been on the dean's list at DePaul for 3 consecutive years. Both she and LaNita have a very high bar of academic success. After graduating and obtaining her degree in political science, she has a plan to go on to law school, and she would like to work in the United Kingdom, studying international and human rights law, and would love to become an advocate for women and children in developing countries. So with that introduction, I give you Miss Yewande Gilbert.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon. The title of my essay is called A Man for All People. When we investigate the historical context that shaped Father Augustus Tolton's challenges, his perseverance, and his leadership, we learn many things concerning the complicated intersections between religion, racial prejudice, and civil rights and benevolence. Tolton's historic fight against racial prejudice was unprecedented. He used his position as a priest to reveal and battle injustice. He was an activist for equality on behalf of many. Political scientist Harlan Cleveland famously stated, "Leaders are problem solvers by talent and temperament, and by choice." As a former slave and as a priest who had the chance to live outside the United States, Father Augustus Tolton learned that living and working in diverse environments cultivates the mind. Father Tolton sought refuge in the Catholic Church. This church taught Tolton important lessons about self-development and how to help others, black and white. Although Christianity was used to justify slavery, there is no justification in the Bible, regardless of the curse of Ham. The curse of Ham, also known as the curse of Cain, refers to Genesis 9, chapter 9, verses 20 through 27, where Noah, the father of Ham, cursed Canaan, and the son of Ham, and all future generations, to a life of subservience. Though Genesis chapter 9 never mentioned the skin color of Ham or his children, the passage has been used to justify the enslavement of black Africans. Those who believed in the curse of Ham used it to continue the subjugations of black Africans, thereby stripping slaves of their humanity. They were viewed as commodities, objects to be bought and sold. However, slaves protested their most unnatural and cruel conditions. Slave uprisings and the creation of the Underground Railroads represented the need to be free, to be acknowledged, and to be treated like humans. Father Tolton's conversion to Catholicism and evolution as an African American leader also demonstrated the active pursuit of civil rights and the critique of a racially charged society. Father Tolton developed the ability to endure all the hardships of slavery and transform them into resistance and determination. Father Tolton faced many obstacles before he began a life of service. Tolton fought for people of color, encouraging them to become civically engaged and religiously engaged, but not before battling the many prejudices concealed by the initial hesitancy of the society he lived in and hesitancy he met while entering the Catholic Church. As a child, he was sent to St. Peter Parish against the protest of many white parents. While completing his schooling, Tolton was encouraged by many priests to engage in the study of priesthood. Initially, the community of Franciscans denied Tolton's application, not wanting to integrate the institution. With the help of other priests and a bishop, Tolton was admitted to the College of Propaganda in Rome. However, his admittance was granted with the understanding that he would practice his priesthood in Africa. After his studies in Rome, Tolton was ordained as a priest on April 24, 1886. he was made the priest of St. Joseph Church in Chicago. His congregation consisted mostly of white Catholics, a few blacks, and other racial minorities. Father Tolton believed this to cause tension between him and the bishop and other priests who wanted Tolton to preach to an all-black congregation. He wanted to use the church as a vehicle. Initially, Tolton returned from Rome to construct a church for all black Catholics. He wanted to use the church as a vehicle to address black social concerns and as a place of union in face of discrimination. Unfortunately, the church located on Quincy was never completed due to the increased tension created by the attention he was receiving. However, the creation of multicultural Catholic churches was a major milestone since emancipation. Tolton later transferred to St. Monica's Church in the center of Chicago's Bronzeville. He would preside over this parish till his early death on July 9, 1897. One of the greatest contributions made by Tolton was the precedent that he set for men of color pursuing priesthood. By a consequence of his efforts, Father Tolton was able to use his faith to serve as an example to blacks, the church, and society. As a priest, as the first African-American priest, Tolton labored timelessly to educate all people of the importance of civil liberties and human rights. Civic engagement has been vigorously advocated for by black leaders since the abolishment of slavery. It is often thought that civil rights are the only rights African Americans had to fight for, but in reality, the fight began with being considered full human. Tolton knew that it was important for the minority and the majority to see life from the other's perspective. Tolton's life was a work to demonstrate the importance of blacks knowing their roots and understanding the interconnectedness of all people, regardless of race. Father Tolton's journey chronicles the history of African Americans, the importance of religion, but most importantly benevolence, in contrasting racial prejudice in this fight for civil rights.
On behalf of all of the people and organizations who have helped to organize this essay contest, I want to thank both of you, LaNita and Yewande, for outstanding papers. Thank you both very, very much. And I also would like to invite up Bishop Perry so that we can present both of you with your awards. So if we could first have Miss LaNita Burton.
The history of black Catholics is written by the consummate black Catholic historian, Father Cyprian Davis, a Benedictine monk of St. Myra at Archdiocese in Indiana. He is working on a sequel to this book, but right now this stands as the definitive singular history of black Catholics, and a certificate of recognition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if we could have Miss Yewande Gilbert also come up.
Thank you.
One more. Okay, fantastic. Bishop Perry, would you like to have some closing words?
I don't know if anyone has any particular questions about this. This was a pretty concentrated dosage of history.
It was, and so while we have, oh, sorry.
Sure. If anyone has any questions or comments, we'd be very welcoming of them. Those of you who are interested in history of church, or racial politics, all those kinds of things. No questions.
No questions at all? Going once, going twice. Oh, there we go. Question.
How long was the Catholic Church segregated?
It depends on what topic that you're looking at. Are you talking about education?
No, racial segregation.
Or racial segregation? You know, that varied. We had several bishops in this country who, at different times, ordered the desegregation of schools and hospitals, those kinds of things. Archbishop Strick here in Chicago, for example. The Archbishop of New Orleans and the Archbishop of St. Louis. Those are three major cities that ordered through a great deal of turmoil and even opposition. And that took place in the early 60s, 1960, 61, 62, 63. And many of our institutions began opening up to African Americans. It was about 40-some years ago.
If I can add to that. Very briefly, in my classes, we talked a little bit about the initial encounter, in fact, right, between Catholics and Africans, right? This is not new. We've talked about this. Yes, okay. And so to emphasize one of Bishop Perry's points, that question's an excellent one, but answers do depend upon historical time and historical context. So at various times, the Catholic Church has done missionary work in Africa. Now, when you talk about the American context and the way in which race develops here, that in some ways is a different story, and that's the story to which Bishop Perry was referring to. So one always has to be sensitive to issues of time and place when asking what was a very good question. There must be some follow-ups after that good question. You're not allowed to ask a question. We have to ask you the questions. But no, ask your question.
Why was it chosen, and why was Father Augustus Tolton chosen for St. Tolton?
Why was it chosen?
Like, what took it to be to 2000?
It was an idea that came from our Archbishop, Cardinal George. In 2010, we had a year of observance for the priesthood. It's called the Year of the Priest. There was a lot of seminars, and reflections, and retreats, and scholarly renditions on the priesthood that was done. And the Cardinal thought we should dig into our historical presbyterate here in Chicago to find a priest throughout our history. Chicago became a diocese in 1843. A priest from our history who emulated the virtues of the priesthood in stellar fashion. And the name of Tolton immediately came up without opposition. So it was an idea of Father Cardinal Francis George. And it just took off.
What exactly has to be done in order for Father Tolton to be considered a saint?
Well, there are two commissions that drive the whole process. One is called a historical commission. The other is a theological commission. The historical commission is made up of several scholars who are designed to put together the archival record of his life and to leave no stone unturned with that from the beginning of his birth to his death. The theological commission is made up of several theologians who are charged with arguing his virtuous life. What made him such a stellar Christian in the times within which he lived? How did he emulate the virtues, the message of Jesus Christ and the gospel for the times he lived in? That is done locally at the local diocese. It's usually the diocese where the person died that begins the investigation. Then in Rome is in charge of looking at God's endorsement of this individual. Tolton has to be more than just an historical figure for us. He has to be like a Frederick Douglass or a Martin Luther King. We need a sign from God that Tolton is up there with God, in other words. And that's where a miracle, an absolute turnaround in health, has to be absolutely documented. And we're looking at one, possibly two right now. Remarkable turnarounds in health. That's essentially it. That's the nutshell, the process. It takes several years to accomplish all of that.
Okay. So when you say a miracle or an absolute turnaround in health,
how would they relate that to him? Would it have something to do with his relics, or?
It has to do largely with prayer and intercession on those around the individual who pray to God through Tolton's intercession to have a person healed. It has to be an absolute intervention, something that the doctors cannot do, or the medical profession, the known medical science cannot accomplish at the present time, so that it is directly God's intervention of the individual, not anything that medical science can do. The final stroke of that examination is done by 3 physicians in Italy who are atheists. It cannot be Christians who examine it, because they don't want the Christians to somehow give weight to the obvious affirmative action of the thing.
So they're atheists that work for the Vatican?
It has to be totally disassociated from the church. They examine it and they say, well, this looks like it's remarkable. It's beyond nature. It's supernatural.
We'll take one more question.
I was just going to ask, is it possible to have any of these what is it called again? That you said the turnarounds or
Miracles?
The miracles to be happen after death, or do it have to be during his lifetime?
It has to be after death. Not during lifetime. It has to be after death.
Okay. Because I got the impression it was during his lifetime.
No one thought of making Tolton a saint during his lifetime.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I meant the miracles themselves. The miracle itself happening.
No, it has to be after death.
Okay. All right.
You know, these are the 2 that we are looking into now. They are current happenings, recent happenings within the last 2 years.
Okay, I think we have come to the conclusion of this very wonderful ceremony. Again, I have to thank Bishop Perry. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Miss Yewande Gilbert. Thank you, Miss LaNita Burton. Forgive me. And thank all of you for coming. There's lunch next door, right? So in terms of the people who are here for my class, we're not going, this is our class, but you do have lunch next door. We are meeting next Thursday in our regular classroom, okay? And again, thank everybody for coming.